If we could, wow. Can we close that door and call this meeting to order? Representative Kendrick, would you like to present to us your bill? First of all, let's open up in a word of prayer. Brother Prince, can I get you to say a word? What number are you, Brian?
10.
Huh?
He's 10.
There you go. Check.
There you go.
Let us pray. Eternal God, our Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for another opportunity to do the business of this great state of Georgia. Father, we ask that everything we do be pleasing unto you and that we can continue to do your will. In Jesus' name, amen.
At this time, we're going to hear from Representative Darshawn Kendrick. Tell us about your bill and the LC number, please.
Is this on? Okay. House Bill 8 is LC 500946, and this is a revival bill of the angel investor tax credit that we passed a few years ago. And really the purpose of this bill is to attract investment dollars here in the state of Georgia. In order for us to be the #1 state to do business and attract businesses, we have to attract capital here as well, because that's the #1 reason that problem that businesses have. So the previous law went from 2011 to 2018 and it's sunset. So it is the exact same bill that was passed at that time, except for 3 changes. The first change is that there's a $5 million cap each year on the total amount of credits that can be given to investors within a calendar year. And the other thing is the investor can take credit during the year of the investment. So how it worked under the previous bill is you had to wait until the following tax year's returns in order to claim the credit. This would allow them to essentially claim it, make an amendment and claim it the same year that they made the investment. And then the last change is you do not have to be a qualified investor under this bill. So one of the issues and one of the reasons that the bill was sunsetted is because a lot of people didn't take advantage of the tax credit. And the reason is because essentially we put a qualification that you had to be a wealthy investor to take advantage of the tax credit. Well, most Georgians are not wealthy, and so the tax credit wasn't used to its potential because we had this qualification that you had to be a qualified investor. So this bill removes that qualification in order to take advantage of this tax credit. So any Georgian that invests into a qualified business can take advantage of this 35% dollar-for-dollar tax credit on their Georgia tax returns. So that is the bill, and there's a fiscal note that is attached as well.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any, being this is a hearing only on the city, do we have any questions from any of the members of the committee or from the audit? I see no questions. Thank you for presenting your bill.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have Chairman Ron Stevens. Sure, House Bill 519.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me pull it up here. House Bill 519 is what essentially is a welfare to work program. Some of these folks that have become unemployable, whether they got into a situation of being
Excuse me, Chairman, will you give me the LC number, please?
Sorry, LC 620093.
Thank you.
Thank you. May not be employable. These folks are, this bill matches a federal plan that already encompasses this group that has a federal tax credit. This tax credit on this targeted group, again, is 100% tax credit, dollar for dollar, for these folks under Section 51 of the Internal Revenue Code. It allows for the employer to not exceed on these eligible employees an income tax credit of more than $500. Beginning on 36, it has clawback provisions in this particular bill. And on the next page, beginning on 46, the amount of credit on this shall not exceed the taxable year's income liability for that year. And the committee, I'm sure, will have questions regarding number 2, where the tax can be used against succeeding years and prior years' liability. I'm sure that'll get some conversation. The bill has a 10-year cap and a 5-year sunset. And I think we've got some folks that wanted to speak to it.
call up our first guest. Did you want to ask a question? Okay.
Did not sign up for it. See somebody call him up. Yeah, just call him up.
Okay, the first one who would like to come up and speak, I don't have them signed up.
Nobody signed up? This is the first hearing, they're not here. Good.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, do you have a question?
Well, I was going to try to, you probably said this, you was trying to get to pull it up, but this is a match of what the federal credit is. Does this vary in any way? I'm going through here trying to pick through it, or is it just an exact match, so to speak? I mean, with some.
But again, this credit would only be a maximum of $500 on the state side per employee for these individuals.
Do you see this as something that we would continue, or is this for it's with the sunset, or is this just for a set period of time that we want to reassess, or is something you just see as sunset putting in there just because?
This is something that needs to be, I believe, reevaluated on a periodic basis. And honestly, we need to check some of these programs, especially on the income tax basis, to see if they're working. But again, the idea is to get these folks off welfare into the tax-paying system.
Understood.
Thank you. Next is Chairman Newton.
If you don't mind, got time for a question? I was trying to look up targeted group. You said difficult to employ. I was just trying to look up the definition under the federal code, section 51 on a targeted group. Is that spelled out in the bill, or is it?
It is low-income folks for whatever reason, or those that are
Formerly incarcerated.
could be formerly incarcerated. Some of those that have no skills, but all of that definition is within the federal code.
I appreciate the opportunity. I know businesses have to take a chance sometime, and giving somebody a second chance when they've paid their debt to society or whatever from a mistake. And so I like that idea that we're going to help that business that's willing to basically take a chance on somebody who might not be employed otherwise. Thank you.
And again, to get them off the dime.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anyone else have any questions? Well, being that this is a hearing only, I know we were waiting on, we're going to, yeah, let's stand at ease for a few minutes. We're waiting on one more participant for another bill, but thank you, Chairman Stevens, for your presentation. We will just reassign that bill that we were the presenter that we were waiting on to the next committee meeting. So at this time, we'll exit out of this committee and move on to the next one. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call the Valorem Subcommittee to order. And we're going to start out with Representative Washburn, H.R. 250. If you don't mind coming to the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, subcommittee. This is House Resolution 250, LC 280648. We brought this last year, and it passed out of the Ways and Means last year, but did not get past the Rules Committee. This is a resolution that proposes an amendment to the Constitution to allow the governing authority of any county or consolidated government to adopt an alternative method of valuation of real property. The one reason that we wanted to bring this back this year, of course, we did 581, but we have also seen a number of our local governments opt out of 581. And so for two reasons. One, because of that, we also thought that another option might be in order for our local governments. Basically, this just allows them to adopt the option to adopt, they're not being forced to do it, the option to adopt a system of valuation of real property that is based on purchase price. And that is it simply. Now, I'd argue for that because after being in the real estate business for 50 years this year, I've been married to my wife for 50 years, she's somewhere there in the audience. And I've been in the real estate business for 50 years, and I can tell you from experience, the purest method of putting a value on real property is to let the marketplace speak. And the value that it places on it is the real value. When I used to teach real estate licensing for 20 years, I would always teach that it's not what I think it's worth, it's not what you think it's worth, it's not what a tax assessor thinks it's worth. It is worth what the market will pay for it. And so it's a pure method of doing that. One of the arguments for this system is that we would have much less, there'd be more transparency. We'd have less argument and appeals in that process. And so we believe too that, I'm sure we'll hear from ACCG in a moment with some opposition to the bill. If our goal is to have a growing digest in a county or in any county, then to let the marketplace speak and the values be reestablished by the marketplace in all types of property, all types. We believe that the digest would grow steadily, and that if this option is chosen, that it would work quite well and that other counties might choose it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that is the bill. The current values as set by the tax assessors would be the starting point, but from that point on, when a property sells, that becomes the new value, and it stays that way until it is sold again. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to entertain any questions.
All righty, we do have a question. Representative Chairman Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Interesting bill. I am curious, I know during COVID, certain areas, and frankly back in the late 08, 09, waterfront property went sky high. A lot of it was worth a lot less 3 years later than what people paid for it. There's some people who are still, quote, underwater from what they bought it for in 05, 06. Same thing about even during COVID. There were some areas of the state and that would those homeowners not be eligible for any reduction if their true value, if the market price today was going to be 30% less than what they paid, that fact, they still stuck with what they paid until they substantially improve or move.
It is a two-edged sword in that respect. If you buy a property, then you are set with that value, but it does not allow for a reduction in value. So that is a good question, Mr. Chairman.
All righty, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Buckner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this what we have heard called current use taxation?
I'm not familiar with that term.
Where it's based on the current use or value that is assigned to the use of the property, and it's not like in keeping with what's around it, it's just what that particular property is worth or valued at?
Well, the argument is that the marketplace would speak and it would set the value, the true value set by the marketplace. Now, the current use terminology, I had not heard that exactly, but that's a good time to say that, especially with non-residential properties, income-producing properties, the value is set by the marketplace, and a lot of times it's based on income produced and yield and so forth. And so we believe that if you let the marketplace speak, it will put the real value on it.
May I follow up? So if you're in a rural area and you've got trees growing, you've got a value that's assigned to that property, and some kind of big mega project comes and it's making a whole lot more money than the person growing those trees. Sometimes the property value on the pine trees goes up, even though they had the value that the income, it doesn't change. And so a lot of people have talked about, you know, tax me on my property and what I'm doing with it, but don't compare me to my neighbor that may be doing something that's more productive money-wise. So, and I've read it and I just can't figure out exactly what the difference in this and whether it is like current use or as you say, market driven. Is it market driven just for that piece of property or in comparison to the property around it?
Well, this is simply whatever somebody pays for it is what becomes the value. And if they buy it, that's the new value, and that they would not come back and argue that the value is not what they paid for it.
But it's based on that piece of property, not based on if the property next door sells for a huge amount, then it affects.
No, it is on the property you buy that sets the value. It stays that way until you sell it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you, Representative Buckman. We got Representative Houston Gaines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for bringing this. I think it's a really great idea and great conversation to have. Do you know, do any other states do it in this way?
You can't ask a question.
I do not know the answer to that,
Okay.
Mr. Vice Chairman. Les is with us. Les Snyder is with us. He's an expert in this field. Do you know, Les, if any other states do it this way?
Okay. For all. Very good. I think it's a great concept. I really
We're gonna
do.
hear
So
from
thank
two.
you.
Okay, thank you, Representative Gaines. Mr. Chairman, which one are you? Three. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Washburn. No, we looked at this last year, and you and I had a number of conversations. Conceptually speaking, and I may be getting a little ahead of the game, but do you see the possibility of something like this whereby a taxpayer could, or a county, city, the municipality could offer up a one-time payment of property tax? It might be a rather high number, but again, a permissive component to this.
Well, I had not thought of that in conjunction with this bill, but I have heard that concept mentioned before, and that's a possibility, I think. But the key words here are option. Nobody's trying to force local government to do anything. This gives them an option, especially in some of our rural counties. We think that they might like to have this option. But we also see in some of the more populated counties that we think the digest, at the end of the day, this is about establishing a good, solid digest to which we apply the millage rate, of course. And we believe that if allowed to operate, that the digest would rise certainly as equal to the value of the current system, and maybe beyond that, actually. That is one argument that can be made.
Can I follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
real quick? And I think you've already stated this, but wouldn't this greatly simplify from an administrative standpoint what property tax collections look like?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to cut you off. As you know, I chaired a study committee a couple of years ago, and a lot of what we heard during that committee process was frustration with the whole valuation process and the appeals process, and so this greatly simplifies that. We think appeals would drop to almost nothing because it's going going to be hard for somebody to come argue that a property's not worth what they paid for it. And so we do think it would simplify, and again, it's an option, and so we think it bears consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, Representative Washington, we've got a couple of people want to testify to that, so if you don't mind holding on, we'll have them come to the podium. The first one will be Mr. Dante Handel with ACCG.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Chairman Smith, members of the committee. Dante Handel with ACCG. Just had a couple brief comments I'd like to make. ACCG does have some concerns about this resolution, similar to what we had last year in HR 1041. Most of that's around the changes that it makes to the way we treat commercial and industrial properties. I haven't seen it done elsewhere in the country where we're freezing values on commercial or industrial. Georgia only has the homestead exemptions that have those freezes. But it's always been a pleasure to work with Chairman Washburn over the years. Very much appreciate him chairing that study committee and his willingness to speak through the ad valorem issues with us. Be glad to continue discussions throughout the off session and glad to keep working with you on this.
Okay, Chairman Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned commercial and industrial, and obviously those fluctuate through various huge factors. Would you be more comfortable with this if it was just residential? I don't know. Didn't speak to the bill author about that. If this was primarily residential property, would that change?
So I appreciate the question. I'd say that if it were just residential property, then we're looking at a homestead freeze, which we'd be more comfortable with that than it applied to commercial or industrial properties, but still would be uncomfortable with it being a freeze. That puts a lot of upward pressure on the millage rate because it prevents the changes in the values.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Newton. Anybody else on the committee have a question? Thank you, Mr. Handel. We
Thank you for your time.
appreciate your comments. Now we have Ms. Ritterhouse with GMA.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Leona Rittenhouse with GMA. We share ACCG's concerns with the bill. We thank Chairman Washburn for chairing the study committee, and we are happy to work with the chairman in the off-season to address some of our concerns.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Ms. Ritterhouse? Thank you very much. I didn't mention this in the beginning. This is hearing only, so keep that in mind, and there'll be time to work with the chairman, Representative Washburn. Okay, we got one more. Mr. Les, there you go.
Members of the committee, my name is Les Schneider. I'm not here on behalf of any particular client. This is an idea that I've discussed with Representative Washburn, and I think it's a system that will improve what's going on in Georgia. When we got rid of the ad valorem tax on cars, some of the same people who opposed that are opposing this today. When we changed the system on occupational tax, some of the same people who opposed that oppose this today. There is no tax right now that is more aggravating to homeowners than their real property tax bill. And when they pay a certain amount for a home and then they see it inch up every year and the cost of their taxes go up every year, it's very annoying. A business owner who buys a building for $1 million tries to factor in, this is the cost of what I'm going to have to pay for the building, and this is about what my taxes are every year. But if he gets a surprise and all of a sudden the taxes jump 20% on the evaluation and 30%, again, you're not giving that business owner the predictability and the certainty that he or she is looking for. What this bill does is basically eliminate, as Representative Blackman alluded to, a lot of all of the guesswork and a lot of the bureaucracy that exists with our property tax system. If in fact you look at, and I have looked at, large counties and small counties, and you look at their digest, 99% of the time, if you look at all of the sales that occur in that county, the digest is going to grow. And in some cases, it grows dramatically. And the real question becomes, if we allow that to grow, and if Representative Blackman bought his house for $300,000, and I come from California, and I move next door to him, and I'm willing to pay $500,000 for a similar house, then I should be able to afford a tax bill based on $500,000. I shouldn't be having his tax bill inch up simply because I may have made a good or a bad decision on my particular property. So what this bill does is it stops exactly what it says in the bill. We have greater transparency as it's set forth on line 15. We create and we eliminate the ambiguity of appraisals and assessments that's done by a third party who's not writing a check for that particular piece of property. We eliminate appeals by almost 99% because it's hard for me to argue that when I spent $500,000 for a house or a factory, it wasn't worth $500,000. Lowering administrative costs on this entire process, making sure the digest can be done very quickly. But I think you will see that all of the points that are made in line 17 through 33 of the bill are there. We are making this, it's not a matter of dumbing down the system, we're making more predictability in the system. So somebody won't be forced out of their house because all of a sudden all the surrounding properties have sold. Those people who bought those properties, they will take the burden of that value that they believe the property is worth. Again, unlike the previous bill you passed last year, we're not forcing a single county to accept the system. They opt into the system. And the county can have a vote of the commission. If they want to, they can even put a vote out among the entire populace of that county to verify that the county wants, the citizens of that county want this system. So we are allowing the particular county to decide, should we try this system? And, I'm sorry.
That microphone is not, that speaker's not working right, so apologize, Les.
That's all right. So again, I think if we can put this on the ballot and make it an option for any county that wants to utilize it, I think you're going to find, as we did with the TAVT and other things, once somebody goes to this system, they're not going to go back, because they're going to have predictability on how their taxes are done, and they're not going to have creeping inflation. I'm sure all of you have gone through appeals and things like that, and it's very difficult to make some of the arguments that I have seen people do, and there are people who are very shrewd in this area, but I think we need a system where the average citizen who owns property has an opportunity to have the same benefits that somebody who's very learned on appraisal or has money that can pay for various appraisals, be able to have a system that they think is predictable. So I would certainly urge folks to consider this option. Again, we're not jamming anything down somebody's throat. It would just be an option that a county can accept. And I'll be happy to stand for any questions.
Got a couple of questions,
Yeah.
Mr. Les, or Chairman Newton.
Thank you for your explanation. Actually, the reminder about ad valorem taxes on vehicles, and
Right.
the fact that that's based on the initial purchase price instead of any depreciation schedule that may or may not be calculated right. That transition for automobiles did make sense, and this is kind of applying that. This is the initial purchase price. How does the bill, or does it even address yet, would that be an enabling legislation? What about the value of a house you're in now? If you bought it 15 years ago for X amount, and now it's worth 2X, how does a county make the transition to this?
Well,
or is that not really
we had to
specified?
draw a line somewhere. So what we're doing is, let's say your house and my house is at $300,000 and this thing passes. we would start at 300,000, even though you may have paid 100,000 10 years ago. You have to start somewhere. But we basically take the value that it is right now, and it wouldn't go up until I sell it to Representative Washburn, or you sold it to Representative Blackman, and then that person would take the new value. Now, if you do improvements on the land and build a new house, et cetera, there's provisions in this bill that if it's over $50,000, we are going to add that to the value.
Just if I might follow up.
Yeah.
One more, we're gonna make it short so we can go to the next one.
If you did add a $100,000 improvement, does it go up 100,000, or do you go back to the current market value?
It would go. It would go up. It says here, if you look on lines 53, a substantial improvement shall be the construction of, in addition to, or replacement of a structure on such real estate that increased the fair market of the real estate by an amount in excess of 50,000. So in that case, if you put a $100,000 structure on there, in addition
It's
to
going to
what
go
you,
up to fair market value. Thank you.
it would be the 300 that you bought it for plus the 100,000. So now you'd have 400,000.
Okay, thank you, Representative. All right, thank you, Les. Hearing only, you got time to get together and talk about it with Chairman Washburn, Representative Washburn, and we appreciate it. Representative Hefner, is she in the room? Okay, we're going to adjourn this meeting and move to the next one. Thank you.
Representative Ballard, why don't you come to the podium? And if you'll give us your bill number and the LC number.
So I've got LC 501219S.
Okay.
Is that the one you've got? Thank you for hearing this bill. I'm sorry I was a little late. I was chairing my subcommittee over in CLOB. So with this, we have an opportunity to enhance our state's economic development, workforce retention, and veteran support. And this will position us as a leader in attracting and retaining highly skilled, disciplined veterans in our state. And what this does, it adjusts the amount of taxable income that is exempted in the military retirement benefits. And I just was handed this one. So it's literally just handed this. Income received by an individual who's less than 65, paid in retirement benefits for military service in the armed forces or the reserve components, and it will not exceed $35,000 starting in 2028, and then $65,000 starting in 2030. And I will take questions. I will say 27 states have state income tax, but do not tax military retirement at all. None of our neighbors tax military retirement. So we are consistently losing our military retirees every year, especially for our bases that are on our borders, Augusta and Columbus and Valdosta. Florida and Tennessee, of course, don't have any state income tax, but I know that we have a fiscal note that shows the impact of what we lose in tax money from not taxing military retirement, but I don't know that the fiscal note adequately reflects what somebody who retires at 38 or 48, they have 2 or 3 decades left here to work in Georgia and contribute to Georgia, and we are losing out on some really good people who will contribute to their communities and their regions and to our state. and I will be happy to take questions.
Representative Ballard, isn't it true that whenever these folks retire at 38, the fiscal note can't possibly show the massive amount of revenue the state gets from income tax that they're going to be working on another job, which is still taxable?
Yes, exactly. My father worked with a gentleman who had a full retirement from his 20 years in the Marine Corps and then worked 30 years for Goodyear. So, I mean, you know, he stayed I was raised in North Carolina. He stayed in North Carolina for 30 years and was a contributing member. So I think in the civilian world, we think of retirees as older folks. In the military, it can be somebody much younger than me.
Members of committee.
I have a question if nobody else does. I'm going to thank Representative Ballard. I know many people over time have brought similar bills, and she has obviously done a great job here and has owned this, and very much veterans are a big part of our community back home. So I wanted to thank her and allowing me to be a signer on this, and actually thank her for letting us take a look at some of the fiscal impacts at some different levels. So appreciate you allowing us to pull this substitute in, and we can try to better plan and help our appropriations friends over there on a year-to-year basis by getting to that full at some point, and just see how quickly we can.
And I will say this bill, I had so many signers from all of our military communities, and it was truly a bipartisan effort.
It's a very big deal in my area, and at this time, if there's somebody who'd like to make a motion to waive the rules for the second reading, I have one here. Is there a second? We have a second. Excuse me? With the chairman's approval, if there's no objection, we'll move on to a vote. All those in favor of moving the bill to the full committee, say aye. All those opposed? The bill, thank God, moves on to the full committee. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you so much, and now I'm going to run back across the street and finish my meeting.
No, you can just stay right there. We'll just move on to House Bill, is it 317 and HR 192, both companion pieces. Chairman Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is LC number 442966. This is a very long bill. It's a 54-page bill, so I'm going to stay seated if there's no objection and try to explain this the best that I can. What this is the Workforce and Residential Infrastructure District. A Workforce Residential Infrastructure District, or a WRID, simply is a tool to allow local governments to approve a finance mechanism for infrastructure needs such as roads, water, sewer, donated school facilities and utilities, conservation areas, parks, and security, not police, security. This tool, if approved by local governments, would allow the landowners within this particular taxing district to tax themselves to pay for public improvements required by the local governments to develop their property. This means that housing and other needs can be delivered on a much faster timetable, and only the landowners directly benefiting from this particular mechanism would pay for them. Let me say that again. Only the landowners in this, they tax themselves, if you will. We do not pass that on to folks outside of this particular district. This approach has been very successful, if you will, in other states like Florida and Texas and other states. Lines 56 through 88 of the bill talks about definitions. And just as a side note, if you will, the only current mechanism that I can see that comes close to this is something that's not privately funded, but works as a tax allocation district, or TAD. Those you might imagine, and I just did one for the fastest growing county in the state, in Bryan County. A TAD allows for very expensive infrastructure that might be located farther away from the main area of water and sewer and all the other infrastructures, for the homes to be built in that area to be paid for by the folks that move into that area. The difference is that's on a public financing mechanism through bonds. This is a private financing mechanism through bonds, essentially is the difference in large part. Let's see, lines 557 through 559 talks about the infrastructure development process. There is nothing that cities or counties do can be done in this particular district. In other words, there's no zoning, there's no police, there's no enforcement, no regulatory powers. Everything has to be approved by the taxing authority that is within this particular district. Lines 580 through 622 talks about the general authority and limitations of the WRID and its funding. The debt of the WRID, the RID, shall not be an obligation by the state or any local taxing authority. It is strictly within the RID. What kinds of things can you build with the RID? If you're looking on line 629 through 718, what kind of infrastructure can you do? Well, there's everything from stormwater management to pipes, water supplies, water treatment plants and its pipes, bridges, culverts, roads, transit, are such facilities that can be built as long as they meet the local building and state building codes. Environmental cleanup if needed, conservation and wildlife habitat, parks and recreation facilities, security improvements are provided within the RID but does not include police. Line 719 through 1164 talks about the RID funding, and this is important. The RID in no way takes ad valorem taxes away from the current government. This is in addition to, and is clear to the homeowner that is building on this area, that this RID is over and above the taxes that are paid to either the city or the county. Lines 1273 through 1311 talks about the termination of a RID. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't want to keep a RID forever. They're designed to put in infrastructure, and if number one, if they're not used within 5 years, they go away automatically. If they are used, and if the services are picked up, ladies and gentlemen, once the bonds are paid off that funds these things, or if the local government picks up the services, then they are to be dissolved. Lines 1313 through 1337 talks about the disclosures of a RID. Whenever you buy a property within a RID, it is placed on your deed forever in large print that there's going to be these additional charges over and above the taxes that you would normally pay to the taxing authority. Ladies and gentlemen, that's essentially what this does. It strictly is another mechanism to fund very large infrastructure needs in areas. My personal opinion, as we've looked at some of the areas that were hit by this hurricane of late, whenever you have massive amounts of property that was decimated, timber and others, in some of these counties, they do not have the wherewithal to form a TAD. But this mechanism, if needed, will be able to fund the infrastructure needs on a large basis for the property owners in that area. And then they would be responsible, if you will, and the new people that move in to pay for that infrastructure is only another mechanism. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll accept any questions if there are any.
Just real quick, I know Chairman Newton has a question. We have 3 speakers. We have another committee starting at 2 o'clock. So, and this is one of a few hearings I think we're going to try to have on this particular piece of legislation. Dr. Newton, did you have a question?
Just, it sounds like an innovative solution for a huge challenge that's happening down on the coast, and hopefully is going to happen in other areas of Georgia. I'm just curious from a procedural thing, are these tax exempt bonds that are these,
yes,
are they backed by the taxpayers or like the county, or is it just itself, the RID itself?
We have some folks who are going to speak on that, but they're supposed to be tax exempt, and the bonds are going to stand on the full faith of their ability to go in with their bottom line and show that they can afford to pay the debt. And that's,
I think, yeah, it is. We have 3 speakers. Call on Mr. Clint Mueller with ACCG. Got y'all busy today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Clint Mueller with the County Commissioners Association. We are in support of this measure. We've supported similar measures to this in the past. I tell you, though, that right now with what we're going through with affordable housing and the lack of adequate supply, to me, this is a good opportunity for us to address the supply issue. I'm not going to say that these are going to be the most affordable houses, but it does fill a need for the supply, and hopefully that, by creating more supply, it's going to benefit the whole housing market. We also have a need in some of our areas, like down in Bryan County, where they built this big manufacturing facility to put a lot of houses in an area quickly. And as you know, local governments cannot do that without infrastructure. Infrastructure is very costly. Water, sewer, roads, and somebody's got to pay for it. The thing we like about this mechanism is you're putting that burden on the people that voluntarily choose to buy a home or buy a business, because this could be businesses too in that area, instead of the existing property owners that have maybe lived there all their life. So it's similar to like an impact fee. We have impact fees now, but this to me works even better than impact fees, because this is for large master planned developments. So it allows us to get infrastructure put in on the front end. We visited some of these developments down in the state of Florida, and it's interesting because they have the school buildings, the roads, the water and the sewer, the fire station. All those assets are already on the ground built before they start selling houses, versus the way we traditionally develop in our state. We build a neighborhood, and then we build another neighborhood, and then we realize, oh, now we need a new school, or now we need a new fire station, and now we're trying to find land, which is very expensive by that point, to try to build that new fire station or that new school. And then we've got to usually tax everybody to pay for it. This, again, gets that infrastructure built on the front end, and it gets the people that are buying into that development to pay for that. And you know, there's a whole lot to this, and I know we're going to have more discussion later on, and we want to participate in that discussion. We can talk more about the financing later on, but we're talking about government-owned infrastructure. This is not private. The private piece is the businesses and the houses that get sold, but the roads and the infrastructure, they're just paying for it, but it is government-owned. There'll be government bonds, but the actual government's not on the hook for those bonds. If somehow the development went under, it's the bondholders that would be on the hook. The people that invest in those bonds that would be at risk. So you have to sell this to the bondholders, but the governments are not on the hook in any way. The taxpayers would not be liable for anything that were to happen in this. But we can talk more about that later. Again, I just want to say that we appreciate you bringing this legislation, and we're in full support of it.
before you leave, Clint, isn't it true that this particular type of funding mechanism in no way circumvents the actions of any local county or city?
Absolutely. So there's got to be agreements in place before any of this happens. So the county or the city has to agree to all of this up front. So in one jurisdiction, the county may say, we want you to build a fire station and we're going to man it with our firemen. Somewhere else, they may say they want for the development not only to build the road, but to maybe maintain that road for a period of time. So if it needs resurfacing, we want the development to pay for the resurfacing. But that's all negotiated on the front end in an agreement. So we know what we're getting into. So local government has to agree to all of this ahead of time. There's no surprises down the road.
All right, thank you. We do have a couple of questions. Representative Cannon.
Clint, only question is any impacts to service delivery with these types of organizations?
So they're not part of our service delivery agreements between counties and cities, but you know the counties and cities are still the ones providing the services to these districts. And so it still enters into the agreements that counties and cities have with each other. It could affect things maybe like, annexation and growth and things like that. You would assume that these are large master plan communities are probably going to be built in the unincorporated areas a lot of the times where you've got large land areas that you can build on. So what we call, I guess, green fields. But it is master plan, so we can hopefully put more development and houses in a smaller space. But this is not really for infill development. It's not really designed for sort of parcel by parcel. This is for like when you're actually trying to do a large scale development.
One quick follow-up, if I can.
Mr. Chairman, please.
To answer, yes, sir. Is that if you already have a water and sewer capital fund in these counties, that in line 1339, it requires them to go to your current provider first and give them the opportunity. So that's also anticipated in that.
And Representative Fry had a question.
Thank you for your words and clarity on this. Isn't it true that this bill actually just works as a developer funding mechanism in partnership with the city for the infrastructure? Because as I'm developing a neighborhood right now, I'm actually front-loading the entire infrastructure with loans to build the roads and the sewers. And once we build them and get our lots divided up, then we turn those over to the city anyway. So this is just a funding mechanism, partnership between the city and the developer to front load the funding mechanism for the infrastructure that the city or the developer may not have access to right now.
Yeah, I agree. It's another way to fund infrastructure. Developers are doing it now, but they're just building it to the price of the home. Versus this, you get to pay a separate special assessment over a period of time. That way, if you sell the house, the new owner gets to pay on it instead of you having to build it all into the price of the house.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. We have two other speakers on this. There will be more hearings in subcommittee, so I just ask you with a next meeting starting in a couple of minutes if you could, be efficient with your time. Mr. Phil Hunt, and then after Mr. Hunt will be Mr. Neil Herring.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll be very brief since we're out of time. And really the one thing I was remiss in saying the last time I presented is this was part of the 2024 recommendations of the Rural Development Council in the House. It was part of their 2025 recommendations. So that was the one thing I forgot to bring up last time. I think Mr. Mueller did a great job explaining how this works. This is how the 8 neighboring states all have one form of this law or another. Georgia's the last one to not have it, and that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Thank you
you
very much. Mr. Herring, you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Neil Herring. I'm a lobbyist for the Georgia chapter of the Sierra Club. We oppose this bill. We oppose this bill since 2007. I've been working on this issue all my life, well, adult life. This issue went on the ballot in 2008. It was defeated by the voters. The Obama counties voted for the amendment. The McCain counties rejected it. It came up last year in the state Senate. It failed to get out of the Regulated Industries Committee. There was a witness from Tallahassee, a lawyer who represents development districts in Florida, who admitted that the cost of capital for development districts was higher than the cost of capital for governments. On line 77, page 4, you'll see that such term, community development district, shall be considered a political subdivision of this state. This requires the constitutional amendment because we're creating a new local government. This new local government has the power to tax. This doesn't sound very Republican to me, but that's not my job to discern ideological positions. What does concern me is the history of development districts in Florida dates back. And I am a baby boomer, sad to report. And the villages in Florida were designed to house retiring baby boomers from other states. And there was a competition with coastal communities, and so they needed amenities. And so this structure, which was actually a California law originally, and Disney World is the Reedy Creek Improvement District, Development District. The villages had to compete for baby boomers who had substantial retirement incomes, and so they embarked on these amenities that are financed through this bill. Water, sewer, roads, bridges, not low-cost items. In the private financing of bonds, the people who are involved in the transactions are paid based on a percentage of the value of the transactions. It's not a fee for service, it's a add-on. And so all of these things drive the cost up. I do believe that there's a need for workforce housing development in this state. There's no doubt about that. And that's not just in coastal areas or areas that have been damaged by storms, but I believe that the state has options that it can pursue that don't require involving Wall Street. We have a Georgia Environmental Finance Authority, which finances water and sewer work now. It's a revolving loan fund. It seems to have worked very well. They're even adding natural gas service to its portfolio of duties. And the Road and Tollway Authority administers a Georgia Infrastructure Bank for road and bridge work out in the state, which is another revolving fund. I don't understand why you don't pursue a Georgia Workforce Infrastructure Finance Authority now and go ahead and start making arrangements for the existing governments, not a new government, but the counties and cities, to have a source of lower cost capital to do water and sewer and road and bridge work for expanding their populations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Herring. I don't see any questions.
Great.
All right.
Next, we'll move on to House Bill 141.
We actually will
We're gonna hold
adjourn.
that? Okay, then this committee is adjourned.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being patient with us as we're moving things around. Today's a busy afternoon. This is the first meeting of the Compliance Subcommittee of Ways and Means. I want to thank the Speaker and Chairman Blackman on behalf of all the House members for the opportunity to chair what I think is a very important effort by the House. Included on everyone's iPad is a copy of the Constitution, Georgia Constitution, Article 3, Section 5, Paragraph 2, highlighted that says, bills for revenue. All bills for raising revenue or appropriating money shall originate in the Georgia House of Representatives. As Senate bills move over that may touch Title 48 or other revenue matters, our Speaker and our Chairman felt that it would be appropriate for the House to make sure that we're consistent with the constitutional application, that revenue bills originate in the House, and to vet those for compliance with the constitutionality. And so that's what this committee will have the opportunity to do. As the senators join us, I know some are already working with House members in the Senate to try and amend their language onto House bills, but we're also giving them an opportunity to come before us to explain their underlying legislation, and that's where we're going to begin today. We'll call up Senator Strickland, and as he's coming up, I will thank him for already working with our chairman and others to try and identify how we can work on an important piece of legislation of his. So, Senator Strickland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate your work on these bills. Even though it's a Senate bill, I think it's something that you guys will find is good for all of Georgians, and I look forward to working with y'all to make sure we're in complete compliance with the Constitution with how we pass this bill if we're able to get it passed. Senate Bill 89 is a bill that comes from a study committee that I chaired last year that looks into the issue of lack of access to affordable child care in our state. It's something that every young parent, every working grandparent raising kids, single moms and dads and employers in our state all know how big a deal this is. It's something that we learned in our study committee is impacting everyone from big business all the way down to those folks who don't come up here and testify, that are at home trying to figure out how to afford to pay their bills, how to afford to keep working when they're dealing with child care issues. So it's a very important issue that we all can relate to in some way. This bill does not solve the problem. This bill is hopefully the first step for us as a legislature in helping to address the problem. Senate Bill 89 does three things. It goes into our tax credit laws, looking at Section 1. This is an existing tax credit that's refundable for taxpayers in our state with children when it comes to applying a certain percentage of expenses, child care expenses. We increase that tax credit, as you'll see there on line 18, to increase that existing tax credit to make sure that more parents can get more money back, or actually keep more of their money when they consider their child care expenses. Section 2 is the part that does cost, and I use air quotes because it's not really costing us money, but is the most expensive part when it comes to revenue that won't be realized of the bill, and that's the new tax credit that we set at $250 per child, and this is for what we consider non-school age children, children under the age of 7 in our state, with a new tax credit to help offset some of those costs of raising children in our state. One thing our committee found that was very interesting, and we talked about this at biannual as well for those of y'all that were there, it now costs more to have a new baby than it does to pay for a child to go to college at one of our institutions in our state. And it's just all the rising costs that are associated with having children. Inflation has hit us so hard in so many different ways the last few years, but this is one of the areas where the costs have gone up the most the last few years when it comes to child care costs. So that's, some say it's a drop in the bucket, but it's a drop to help our parents hopefully offset some of those costs, and it sets a new tax credit in our code to help young parents in our state. Finally, Section 3, this deals with our employers. This expands an existing tax credit for employers that offer child care for their workers. Every employer that we talk to would love to offer child care if they can for their workers, all able to do that. We have a current tax credit that's a little bit more restrictive. We're expanding to not just increase the amount of expenses that can be claimed for this, but also flexibility in the number of the percentage, as you see on line 77, of the children that have to be your employees, of the children of your employees, to make sure they can pool with other companies, other individuals and communities to offer childcare for workers. That is a quick, I could go more into details of the issue, but that's what the bill's doing. We have a large coalition of folks that have supported us throughout this process. Some of them may want to speak here today as well, including the Georgia Child Care Association, Voices for Georgia's Children, Metro Chamber, Georgia Chamber, but this is something that I think we all can get behind. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Senator. I know you have a few young children yourself, so it's something that you're aware of. I remember seeing a touching video around Valentine's Day with you and your wife, and made reference to your children. Part of that love story, would you want to share with us how that originated and in which chamber you served in at that time?
Yeah, you were involved in that, I think. Well, not completely, but so when I started serving in the House as a young freshman, the same year you were a freshman, I ended up meeting a young staffer for Governor Deal at the Capitol. And as people do around here, we kept it secret for a little while. But you and a couple others, the only people at this body that knew about that relationship. It turns out that it worked out. We were engaged by that summer and married the next year, and the rest is history. Only 2 children. You said a few. Only 2, 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. Now, it shows how old we're getting, too. That after all that time, you know, we both grown up a lot. I've got a 7-year-old looking at me now and a 5-year-old looking at me for guidance. It's kind of scary.
That's exactly right. That's very scary. Chairman Martin.
Good gentlemen, how long, if you don't mind, how long have you been married?
Well, that's a good question. It'll be 11 years, May 24th this year.
So in fact, he did get past the 10-year qualification period.
Yes, we survived.
Chairman, isn't that right? Now, I do have a serious question about your bill. And I could do it offline, but I'd like to just investigate the portion of out of company children. So if corporation, you know, Acme Corporation is doing daycare and we're giving them credit, you know, where the kids come from, because I'm sure it's not true. I'm sure there's not enough of this going around in some places, but I'm also equally sure that somebody out there in the private sector that's not getting a credit is going to go, hey, they're competing with me on an unfair play. So I'd just like to kind of see, game plan those numbers out with you to make sure we weren't hurting the private businesses that are doing it without a credit, because they're squeezed too, you know, sometimes by premises liability and those things.
Sure. There's a lot of costs that come into operating a child care facility. We heard in the study committee from those who represent child care facilities. We also heard directly from a few owners. They support the legislation. The change goes from 95% to 75%. The problem is some businesses aren't big enough to have enough parents to make it make sense to offer child care. And so that's just trying to give a little more flexibility where you can pool, that's the word I'm using, with another company to have other children there participating as well. And it could also be the children of the workers in the child care facility. That was one of the things that was really interesting to me. Is one of the biggest issues we saw for child care facilities in our state trying to operate is finding workers, because their workers also need child care.
All right, Chairman Blackman.
I think I probably share, Chairman Martin's question a little bit is how does this impact the private sector? And, a lot of small business people have their own child care facilities. So if they are, in business for that. And I had a couple of follow-up questions too. Like $250 is like an annual amount per child.
That's right.
And for child care, that covers what, about a week's worth? I got a 5 and a 6-year-old too.
Yeah, at best probably. It depends on where you are in the state, which it doesn't, just because you're in Atlanta doesn't mean it costs more than it costs in rural Georgia either. But that's, it is a small amount. But the flip side of that, I didn't mention this, the fiscal note on this says that part of the bill is $162.8 million. Again, I've had people say, well, that's costing the state. It's not costing the state that's unrealized gains. That's a tax credit, but it's still real money. And so obviously at some point, if we want to expand that, we can set this up now and look at expanding that tax credit down the road. But we also have to be mindful of the amount of money that will be coming out with that.
Mr. Chairman, can I? Now, I think 7 is what you said. I've got a 5 and a 6. We have similar age kids.
Similar age.
I love the pictures of y'all's. If they're in kindergarten or pre-K, do they still qualify for the same tax credit?
The way the bill's drafted, we use the age of 7. And I am, let's see.
I didn't see that, but I just...
So it's on line 37 when we look at the definition of qualifying child. So, and then someone else can correct me on this. I'm assuming that's looking at January 1 of the qualifying year. I'm not a tax expert, but I believe that's what we'd look at with that. But we may not get the money. You know, the idea of that age, though, and I should have mentioned this earlier, Lieutenant Governor has led on this issue. This is a very important issue for Lieutenant Governor, and I think I'm acting as his full leader today. But that is one of the things in particular that he was adamant about, is looking at those earlier ages. As you know as well, Mr. Chairman, there's depends on where your kids go to school. Private school may cost more, but otherwise you see these early years where child care is the most expensive. When you have a child that's not yet in school, most kids are starting kindergarten around the age of 5.
Thank you for answering the questions.
Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Chairman Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned something interesting on line looks like 77 to 75% are children of employees. You also mentioned some businesses aren't big enough to do this. Of course, if 2 or 3 companies located close to each other, completely unrelated, wanted to go in together, does the current language allow them to do that? And 75% are children of employees of the 3 respective companies? Or is it just meant that outside 25%, but only a single company can take advantage of this at a time under the current language?
If what I say is wrong, because somebody will correct me, or I can come back and correct you on this, but my understanding is that this is a taxpayer, and so it's company by company, and so you're not able to pool that. And if I'm wrong, hopefully somebody will.
So the facility
correct
has to be run by just one company.
That's right. Okay. That's my understanding. And whatever the current rule is, we didn't change that part, because this is an existing tax credit that exists now.
All right, this is just a hearing today, and we have 2 more measures to consider before full committee. So, just the only thing I think I would leave for the sponsor is just to think about how it could have been done, maybe raising the dependent exemption deduction, and us moving forward there. But thank you for being with us today. Thank you for
the $250 amount. Is that what you're talking about? Or the 7 age?
Right now, move from 3,000 to 4,000. If you added another 1,000,
oh, the dependent deduction. Okay,
yeah, similar.
I understand.
Fiscal note. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I understand.
Did you want more questions?
By the way, Leader Hatchett said he wanted to talk about some case law and argue about the compliance side of things. I think y'all are right, but I'm here to work with you. So I just want you to say for the record, I don't speak for Leader Hatchett. My bill's separate. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate you being here with us, and we can tell you certainly grew up as a House member. Chairman Hatchett, Floor Leader Hatchett. Used to saying Chairman Hatchett in this room.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And while the Senate Duty Chairman is in here, I just want to let the record reflect I have twice as many children, but I will be half as long as he just took. This is Senate Bill 141. This is a department bill, and what it does is it is in Georgia, we get ranked every year by the Council of State Taxation. Right now, we're sitting at a B-. There are 2 tweaks we can make in our code to bring us up to an A, and that's number 1, to clarify the final determination language in Georgia Code for federal income tax adjustments, number 1, and number 2, extend the appeal and protest period from Title 48 from 30 days to 45 days for tax assessments. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's all it does, and we'll be moved up to an A instead of a B-.
Thank you, Leader Hatchett. For the committee's logistical purposes, The underlying bill is under LC 501147S. There will be a committee sub up for our consideration. We have looked at and determined that this does not have a revenue impact and so is compliant with the Constitution. And we're going to have an opportunity to take a movement on that today. We'll be working on a committee sub that's LC 501229S. I'll let Dr. Newton explain that, but first, any questions for Leader Hatchett? Thank you, Mr. Leader.
Thank you.
Chairman Newton, do you want to explain the addition and on the committee sub?
Correct. This is working off, as you said, LC 501229S. Section 1 we just heard about. It dealt with a date change in particular from 30 to 45 days on appeals and other items. This, what was House Bill 526, which is Section 2 of this sub, also deals with a date issue. It relates to how local governments make tax concessions on historic renovations. Currently, they're limited to 9 years. This section we discussed and passed through our committee and went to rules. Section 2, starting on line 200, allows those local governments the option, not the requirement, but the option to go up to 20 years instead of just up to 9 years if it's commercial income producing property, recognizing that income producing property often has to meet ADA requirements that are much more than maybe a historic residential requirement. So by this being income producing commercial property, it just allows a local government a different amount of time. Doesn't change any state revenue or touch really the local revenue directly. It's an option for the counties.
And cleared this committee, the full Ways and Means Committee unanimously. Just didn't make it on the floor for crossover?
It did not make it on the floor for crossover.
Your other 6 did?
No comment.
All right, any questions for Chairman Newton? All right, I don't see any. Here's the posture, y'all. This is a bill we've determined to be compliant with the Constitution. We have a committee sub that adds on a bill that passed the full Ways and Means Committee unanimously. I would ask for a motion to waive the rules requiring 2 hearings so that we can pass this committee substitute LC 501229S onto the full Ways and Means for consideration. Do I hear a motion? Got a motion from our Vice Chairman. Do we have a second from Chairman Stevens? Any discussion on that motion? All right. All in favor say aye. All opposed, like sign. All right. Now we have the full bill up for consideration with the Senate Bill 141 committee sub. All those in favor, make it be known by saying. All right. Let's make a motion on the original bill. Vice Chairman, second. Chairman Williams, any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, like sign. All right, it is on to the full committee this afternoon. We have one more piece of legislation that is up for consideration. Senator Goodman, I believe, is already working to try and take a ride on a really good House bill carried by our whip, and Chairman Hilton wants to come and talk about and making an addition to Senator Goodman's bill, and so we will have that before us today. Chairman Hilton.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly. All that talk about videos, I know you love my social media videos, so I appreciate the follow there. Thank you to the chairman, the speaker, for their wisdom in creating a compliance committee to help the Senate comply with the Constitution. I think that's pretty important this time of year. Come before you with what was Senate Bill 52, which, as you mentioned, is now taking a ride on another piece of legislation. So the new Senate Bill 52 is a House Bill 655, that was introduced late in session. I'll be working off of LC 50128S. This is a post-production tax credit dealing with the film industry that was introduced and passed in 2017 by our fearless Chief of Staff, Chairman Terry England at the time. That post-production tax credit had a sunset of 2022, so lasted from 17 to 22. This bill reintroduces that tax credit along with a few changes. and I will walk you through that on the legislation here briefly. So if you go to walk with me through the bill, line 65, 66, we're making it clear that the original production that's being worked upon can be either originally filmed in the state of Georgia or outside of the state of Georgia. What I like in particular about this tax credit is that we have a lot of debate and a lot of different feelings and opinions on the film tax. With the post-production tax credit, these are Georgia companies, Georgia-based jobs. The tax credit is non-transferable, so there's no issues there. And there's so much work that's being done after a film is completed that it just makes sense in tandem with what we have in place on the film tax credit side. To continue to walk through the legislation, if you'll go to lines kind of 107 to 109, we are reducing the qualifying expenditure down from 500 to 250 to try to capture more small business opportunity there, making it easier for smaller players to qualify for the tax credit. If you scan with me to lines 121 to 129, this provides for an additional incentive for post-production that's done in more rural portions of our state, so counties with a population of less than 100,000. You will see on line 134 we have increased. There is a cap. Well, two things. First, going up to line 133, we do have a 5-year sunset on the program that would sunset in 2031. Line 134, we do have a cap on the program of $60 million. And then again, you see the sunset on line 161 there. Again, during its tenure, that 5-year tenure, it produced hundreds of jobs, Georgia-based jobs, was very successful, and so looking to bring this program back here in Georgia.
Thank you, Chairman Hilton. And this is will be just a hearing only today. Since you did bring up your videos, could you just tell the committee whether you walked or scootered over here this afternoon?
Scooters are great for knocking doors, not so much up in the halls here of the Capitol. So.
All right. Thank you. Is that Representative Buckner?
I just had a question on line 126. I didn't think we could do populations in bills, and since y'all are focused on compliance, I was just curious about that.
I'll yield to the compliance team here and their good judgment.
Well, thank you for that question, Representative Buckner. That is one reason we're doing this as a hearing only today is for us to hear explanations and for us to make that determination. So I appreciate you raising that question. Chairman Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the bill. You made a great point, I think, on the fact that these are Georgia companies employing Georgians. They don't move from state to state. They don't move out when they're putting down roots here, and then the fact that they can't transfer this credit means they have to actually make money here. That's right. And owe taxes either now or in the next 2 or 3 years. So they're making investments in Georgia. This is a very different animal than maybe some other ones we've done. But
yeah, I've got my own opinion on the film tax credit, but this this made a lot of sense to me, which is why I introduced it for many of the reasons you highlighted. Yeah.
Vice Chairman Ridley.
Thank you. Explain to me on which page was it, where it says you can do it inside and outside the state?
Yes, sir. Line 55 or 65, 66.
Yeah, 66. Explain why we're doing it outside the state. I thought it was only inside the state.
I believe this relates to where it's actually filmed.
May get some help here from Chairman Stevens, I think. Is that what you're indicating here, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. That's it. It's actually the film itself can be done inside, but or partially outside. But the post-production stuff is bringing the stuff in to be done at home in
Correct.
Georgia.
Yeah.
Any other questions from Chairman Hilton? All right, as this is a first hearing, Clarification opportunity from Representative Butler.
Thank you. I appreciate being able to ask the question. I do want the opportunity for our rural communities to have post-production opportunities. I just want to make sure that it's done right in the wording.
And that is the guise of how we're moving through this. Some things are such good ideas, we want to make sure they don't fail on constitutional grounds. Thank you. Since it's a hearing, this is the no further action will be taken. We appreciate you being here, and we will wrap up the business of the committee today and move forward to full committee. This committee stands adjourned.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and call the Ways and Means full committee to order. We have one bill on the agendas just passed out of subcommittee, and that is Senate Bill 141. It's a department bill. We added a House measure, HB 526, which favorably, I think unanimously, passed this body. Did not make it to the House floor with the approval of the author. Leader Hong is going to be the House sponsor. Would you care to speak any further to Senate Bill 141? I know we strike 30 days and replace it with 45. From a compliance standpoint, that gets us in line with one of our rating agencies. And then I think, again, 526, and Chairman Newton, if you'd like to speak to it briefly.
Of LC 501-229S. The second section is HB 526, which passed this committee unanimously, and it just changes a date as well, but it changes, it allows local counties, doesn't require them to, but it allows them in a historic renovation tax agreement or abatement, it allows them to go not just 9 years, but up to 20 years on commercial property.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Just checking with the Department of Revenue. Is everything checked out there? All right. What's the will of the committee?
Move to pass.
I have a motion, do pass, and a second on Senate Bill 141 LC 501-229S. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by stating aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Bill passes. Does anybody have anything for the good of the order? Hearing none, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much. Oh, and last week. I'm so sorry. We had a meeting. It was your birthday. Happy birthday. That was you kicking the desk earlier, right? That's what you were trying to alert us.
That's why she was asking questions in the committee. She ain't even on.